Welcome to the Sustainable Dish Podcast. I'm Diana Rogers, a real food registered dietitian, author, and sustainability advocate. I co-host this podcast with James Connolly, who was a producer on my film, Sacred Cow. I also founded the Global Food Justice Alliance, an initiative advocating for the inclusion of animal-sourced foods like meat, dairy, and eggs for a more nutritious, sustainable, and equitable worldwide food system. You can check it out and join me at globalfoodjustice.org. Thanks again for listening, and now on to our show. Hey everyone, I'm really excited to let you know about the free Community Blood Sugar Challenge that I'm running for the month of February for my followers. You'll learn how to use a continuous glucose monitor, CGM, to find out how food impacts your individual body so that you can make the best choices when it comes to your diet. It was a complete game changer for me, and I recommend CGMs to all of my nutrition clients. I'm partnering with Levels to offer 2 free months when you sign up as a member to get the CGM without a prescription. Just need to visit sustainabledish.com/blood sugar, all one word, and enter your email to get the free ebook, access to the live Zoom calls, and the special offer from Levels. And if you're listening to this after our challenge has ended, you can still get access to my Blood Sugar Challenge ebook and the recorded Zoom calls, plus the special offer from Levels. Learning about how food impacts your blood sugar is valuable information that I think we all should know. Visit sustainabledish.com/blood sugar to sign up. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you. Great. Okay. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am excited to be talking all about sustainable seafood today. Seafood is a really complex topic. It's something that I really haven't done much research on. I've been overly focused, as you all know, on health and sustainability when it comes to land animals, specifically grazing animals. I personally love fish. I actually prefer fish to beef, believe it or not. And I eat a ton of fish and shellfish. And I do find it really complicated to make sure that I'm making a good purchase. I don't always trust the labels that I see in the stores. So I'm going to be learning with you all as we go through this podcast. And today I have with me 2 special guests, Jon Russel and Shannon Eldredge, and they're going to be helping explain how you guys can make better choices when it comes to seafood. So Jon, why don't we start with you? You can give us a little bit of your background and the work you do.
Yeah. What's up, everyone? So I'm the food justice organizer at NAMA, and
can you explain what NAMA is, please?
Yeah. NAMA is the North American Marine Alliance, and our goal is to protect the ocean commons, and I feel like every week of the year that entails completely different work, which is super cool, and also speaks to, the kind of many heads that we're trying to deal with of, the struggle to protect our oceans. And I think one thing I like to kind of name is that seafood is really complex when you go to the store and everything, but it's for a good reason, because it's one of our only wild sources of food left in like large commercial settings, whereas vegetables, fruits, and land animals are all like farmed at this point. And so we see huge amounts of species of fish, from all different fisheries, all different times of the years, all different types of capture and everything. And that's great. And learning about that, you get to learn about like healthier choices, and you get to learn about, your local fisheries or the fisheries of the region that you're interested in getting fish from. And that's like just good knowledge for being healthy.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I already have a bunch of questions that I have written down for you. Shannon, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners, and I'll make even more notes for questions for you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Hi, Diana. I'm Shannon Eldredge. I live out on Cape Cod. I was a fisherman alongside my father, my partner Russell, for many, many years. I was a wild shellfish harvester and um, owned and operated a fish weir business out in Nantucket Sound. And we just retired our family business last year, and now I work for a small nonprofit called the Fishing Partnership that supports the health, safety, and economic security of fishing families across the Commonwealth. I was also on the board of NAMA for many years, and I'm on the board of the Chatham Harvesters Co-op, which is a fisherman-led seafood cooperative here in Chatham.
Awesome. All right. So I guess my first question that a lot of people might be thinking in their heads. Let's talk about farmed versus wild, and also maybe the nuances within farmed, with like shellfish versus something like salmon. Who wants to take that one on?
Yeah,
Or
I
you
mean,
could both answer it. Yeah, go ahead,
sure.
Shannon.
I can start with, wild shellfish or wild fish. Let's just start there.
Yeah.
Wild caught seafood is our last wild protein. And there's so many benefits to eating a wild protein. Um, it's not pumped with hormones, and there are a lot of, we use this word sustainable practices to harvest that fish, and eating sustainably caught wild seafood is supporting a lot of fishing families across the United States. So that's kind of a general overview, which is pretty broad. And then when you get into the nuances, we have an emerging aquaculture industry in the world, under the guise that we have a hunger crisis and we need to feed people, and we have this ocean crisis that we need to protect. And there are a lot of things in that are very inaccurate. But I will say, in terms of uh, farmed shellfish, that especially here on the East Coast, we have a lot of family shellfish farmers that are producing oysters, little necks, and doing a bang up job feeding people that incredible protein, and also cleaning our waters as well, which is so huge. So, when you're talking about farm raised finfish, it's a huge carbon footprint to be able to produce that. Plus, there's a lot of harm to the ecosystem when you kind of interrupt um, the flow of a species' natural um, kind of growth cycle in the water column. So, plus, anytime that there's like an industrial scale food production, it harms a lot of different things, like the people who are most connected to harvesting that fish, the food, the family fishermen, the family farmers. Um, and I'll stop there. I'm going to let John take it from there.
Okay. Yeah. What would you
Yeah.
like to add, John?
Yeah. I mean, first off, the you kind of nested a couple questions into it to give like some specifics, and any one of those nested questions could have been this whole like hour
I know.
podcast. um, yeah, I think so. The common narrative that we see going around is that like wild fishing and fishermen are destroying the oceans, and we've seen Seaspiracy and all these like huge things. Also, don't Google Seaspiracy. We don't give them more traffic than they already get.
Right.
But we see all these things talking about like all the like harms and dangers fishermen are causing the ocean, um, and there are some industrial operations that are extremely damaging, And you know who are like the first people who are like speaking up and like fighting against it are your local like small like and regional fisher folk. Like they're the ones who are going to be the most impacted by that. So
Hmm.
just casting a wide net saying all fish, like all wild fishing is bad, is like super dangerous, because it feeds into a lot of these industrial narratives. Because it's like you have like the Pacifics, the Cargills, all these massive companies who invest huge into a space, and when they see like really bad narratives go into it, you know, you see Cargill start going towards like all the soy, the GMO soy and everything, and like all the, you know, plant-based proteins. And you see all these companies like going towards like aquaculture and everything because they're like, oh, well, people are mad at that. So we're going to go do this, destroy it. And when they get mad at that, we'll just pivot to the next thing. Meanwhile, all the like small, like wild fishermen, all the small, shellfish farmers and stuff are just get like catching strays all the way through. Um, and so like scale has always got to be like such a huge consideration, when thinking about like what's good or not. And then like, yeah, just like wild caught fisheries are like in cycle with the ecosystem, and like when done well are super great. And there's definitely more work that needs to be done on just like communal management, but that's a good problem to have. Like figuring out how we manage each and work with each other is great. And then just like, you know, banning a type of like um, small
Practice.
sustainable practice is not the play. Yeah, and I also want to shout out Foodprint. We've gotten to work with them on two awesome reports: the farmed seafood report and the wild seafood report, that really dig into a lot of these like details that like we don't have time to like really go into.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of really great content between those.
Yeah, we'll post those two reports in the show notes, and let people know what they are when we write up the show. I know that lobster and Whole Foods Market have been in the press a lot lately, and I used to work for Whole Foods Market for many years. Um, I know also there were some groups trying to ban lobster, and there was like a billboard in the um, airport in Portland. Do you guys want to? Are you familiar with that? Do you want to talk about it? I feel like it was all over New England news this summer.
Yeah. Um, Shannon has a lot of really good details, and I just want to do some framing of one giant miss I think there is um, there was a lot of news whenever um, like the main lobster fishery got like I can't remember the exact details, but just like a warning around like their engagement and right whale morbidities. So the warning wasn't that they were killing the right whales, it was that you're not giving the information as to how they're dying. Like they actually got um like they were notified that they weren't monitoring things well, right, properly, not that they were the ones killing it. And that's what caused like the notice to go out. um and then if you look at the data and you look at where most of the right whale deaths are coming from, it's like the overwhelming majority not the lobster fishery. But there's still, you know, because of Monterey Bay Seafood Watch, because of MSC and all these labels, not knowing that or not being aware of it, not listening, not quite sure. They're still just getting so like thrown under the bus, even though they're doing well.
Yeah,
One thing
Shannon.
we really need to be careful is to not make our family food producers the enemy. And on the ocean, there's a lot of people that are very passionate about protecting the ocean, protecting the marine mammals and all sorts of species. And fishermen are also the people trying to protect the ocean. There isn't a fisherman out there that wants to kill the whales. Their intention isn't that. And um, their intention is to protect the ocean to continue to feed people. So we have this, you know, gear type that sometimes entangles whales and other marine mammals and turtles and seals and things like that. And it's really sad and really unfortunate that it happens. Um, but we also have big ships that bring all your goods into port and things like that that strike whales and do the same thing, and cause more mortalities as well. There are lots of scientists that are working with fishermen to try to um, mitigate these risks to the marine mammals, and fishermen are going to the ends to try to compromise and to be able to continue to feed everybody and protect the ocean. So to boycott or ban a bunch of very, very small scale lobster fishermen in Maine, a state that relies on that industry very, very heavily, um, is really dangerous on a lot of levels, because you're cutting off a food source, you're cutting off an entire industry, and you're harming communities of people that are just trying to live and feed everyone. So I think the message is that fishermen are trying to protect the ocean. They're not trying to do any harm to it. They're trying to feed everybody, and we need to look at the nuances before we start to boycott. There's a lot of harm that's done when you do that to communities. Um, and so, if you're looking at alternatives, like, okay, boycott Maine lobstermen, well, where are you going? Are you going to an industrial scale lobster production from some other place? Are you importing that and causing a massive carbon footprint of bringing it in from somewhere else? I mean, the list could go on. So, the takeaway is that fishermen have sacrificed as well, to try to, help manage the ocean and protect the mammals that they're sharing the ocean with.
Yeah. I see such parallels. I'm just hearing such parallels between what fishermen are facing and hunters when it comes to protecting, our forests and national parks and areas where they're hunting. They're stewards of that land because they're not out there fishermen aren't out there to rape the ocean. They're out there because they love being on the sea, and they are making their living this way. And same with livestock farmers. They're not out there to harm their cattle. They want to steward the land. They want to protect soil health, biodiversity. They love their pastures, and they're just trying to make a living. And it's it's just such a common thing I keep hearing over and over again, with so many podcasts I do, where, I just did one the other day with a farmer in New Zealand who, these sheep and beef farmers are being taxed for their carbon emissions when they're 100% pasture based. And these taxes are really going to destroy rural communities and put farmers out of business. And it's such a similar story to what I'm hearing here. Um, when it comes to farmed seafood, farmed finfish, are there any models that you guys see that are okay, that are better? I mean, I did get in an argument with one seafood company that was doing some farmed fish, and they called themselves regenerative, and their inputs were just GMO grains that were going into these fish. And when I called them out, and this was privately, I didn't do it publicly. When I called them out, their response wasn't, how can we do better or anything? It was, well, gee, you're the only ones who asked us about this. And like, nobody else seems to care, kind of thing. We want to call it regenerative. But how? is there any farmed fish that a consumer could buy that they can feel okay about, or is it something that you guys as experts 100% reject?
So, as the average consumer going to like your Whole Foods or Giant Eagle, or just showing my Midwest
Yeah,
upbringing
I
with
was like,
that
where's
one.
a giant eagle? Well, all three of us were in Massachusetts.
um, I don't think so,
Okay.
but that's not to say that models don't exist, because there's actually really cool small, again, scale um, finfish farming that happens. There's a lot of really cool black catfish farmers. Sorry, black farmers who are farming catfish.
I understood
um,
what you meant, but yeah.
um, Down in like the southeast and stuff,
Okay.
working in ponds and small areas, and there are some folks who do just like interesting models of working with like urban farms and using like water runoff, or using the like runoff water from the fish farm to use as fertilizer and stuff for the soil for the urban farm, and
Hmm.
like have this like cycle go for it, because then the water gets filtered, some of it can be used back again, and it's super cool. And then like, if you look at native populations, like like farming is definitely not the word that a lot of these communities would use, but just in ways that they create, like, um,
Ecosystems and habitats that are conducive for that species to
ex-
thrive.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of awesome models. And, Fair Island salmon, don't do it. Farm salmon, don't do it. All these kind of things are like really easy no's. And if you're seeing something farmed in a large retail grocery store, that is finfish, sorry,
Yeah.
specifically finfish, it's just pretty easy to say no as of 2023.
And
Okay.
don't
That's a great thing.
and don't get fooled by packaging that says like organic and natural and things like that, because there's not a lot of weight to those words when it comes to fish. If you're gonna purchase fish and it's wild, it is natural and organic. If it's farmed, it's just not. And that's just a very easy distinction to make. And when you ask about farmed finfish, my mind automatically goes to, in the United States, we harvest more fish than we consume, wild caught. And why would we, continue to export that fish when we and then we're searching for farmed raised fish? I was in the fish market here in Chatham, Massachusetts, the elbow of Cape Cod, which is the third largest fishing port in Massachusetts. Um, a few years ago at a market right on the fish pier, and I walked in and I was looking I was looking for, I can't remember what I was looking for. I was looking for, I think, lobster, um, and I know they had gotten it from the local fleet. And in front of me in line was somebody that was looking for salmon, and the salmon said wild caught, and the person asked the man behind the counter, "But do you have farm raised?" And the guy behind the counter was like, "Well, no, we don't have farm raised." And they were like, "Okay, never mind." And it was the most shocking thing I'd ever like experienced in a fish market, because I was like, why in the world would somebody believe that that was going to be a better source of protein for them? Because
Hmm.
that's really what it boils down to, is that when you're choosing to eat something, you're choosing on a couple of levels. One, you're choosing deliciousness and you have a recipe and all that stuff, but you're also putting it in your body because you need it. You need something about it. And a wild source of protein has way more benefits than a farm raised finfish. So, so when you're thinking about what you're going to eat, I'm always going to go for fresh. And if fresh fish, or even frozen, flash frozen fish is fine too, you know. But I'm always going to go for something that's wild caught because, you know,
Yeah.
we have an abundance of it in this country.
Well, that is really good, and I have in the past worked with some farmed seafood companies that, you know, I didn't make a lot of sustainability claims about them, but I did talk about them being a good source of protein. But I am going to shift that now. So I appreciate you educating me on that. Again, it's complicated, and these companies have a lot of claims, and it's hard, even as a sustainability advocate. It's hard to discern that without the background that you guys have. So I appreciate hearing about that. But when it comes to shellfish, oh, and I just wanted to make another point too, because I have looked into the nutritional benefits of wild versus farmed when it comes to fish. Now, when it comes to domesticated animals, like grass fed versus feedlot finished beef, there's not a huge difference in the nutrient profile because both animals are spending the majority of their life on pasture, and the feedlot finishing doesn't really dramatically impact the nutrient profile of that burger that you're eating. But when it comes to salmon, for example, there is a very dramatic difference in and they're so rich in omega fatty acids that uh, the difference between a wild salmon and a farmed salmon is quite significant, especially because they're such a rich source of omegas. Now, when it comes to oysters and other shellfish, I don't know if there's a difference. I imagine there's not a difference because they kind of grow similarly. Yeah. And as far as sustainability wise, again, you had mentioned that they can be farmed sustainably. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And I just want to add too that oysters are just off the charts. The most superfood I have ever researched out of any food I've looked at. So I try to eat them as often as I see them on sale.
Yes. Yeah, and there's lots of programs too where people are doing shipping, and you can pick up, at least out here. We're very fortunate out here on Cape Cod where there are, you know, oyster farmers and quahog farmers that do pickups. Um, um, you know, programs, or you can go to their, you know, shanty or shop and buy kind of retail directly from them, which is really awesome. Unfortunately, we don't have direct kind of off the boat sales with shellfish in Massachusetts. I do believe that's possible up in Maine, but out here in Mass, you know, you still have to do processing, which has to go through some HACCP things, but it's as close to fresh off the boat as you can get for now. And there are just so many great family farmers out here that make a, you know, a decent living to support their families, and you're absolutely right, providing people with an amazing source of protein that is just absolutely healthy and yeah.
Yeah, and I have
Yeah.
a friend that lives in Somerville that gets an oyster share, so I know that that's an option as well.
Yeah. And I mean, so obviously, if you're near a coast, obviously, seafood should be fairly straightforward of how to get. Um, but you know, y'all should check out. It's finder.localcatch.org. The Local Catch Network has a seafood finder, so you can check out like anything that's nearby. And you'll see. Okay, if you're in like Nebraska, like South Dakota, something like that, not much options yet. We're working on it. You know, we're expanding our networks. But otherwise, like to like the Midwest, to like a lot of like, especially if you're like near the Rockies, Columbia River and stuff. There's a lot of really good sources for seafood, even like away from the coastlines. Um, and there's companies like I'll shout one out that's in eastern Pennsylvania, Wild for Salmon. They're Alaska fishing folks, and they flash freeze the fish and bring it over to you know, the greater Philly region, not quite in Philly, but close. Um, and in Philadelphia, also in Philly. Amazing crew. And there's so many people I want to shout out, but, you know,
Yeah.
another podcast.
Okay. Well, and I think that that also brings up the point of frozen. So let's talk about that because I think, people are starting, I think, a little bit to get more comfortable with thawing their proteins, especially in the case of seafood where it is so perishable. And degrades so quickly. I mean, and having worked at Whole Foods Market for so many years, I saw the waste that would happen because of people's preference to buy things fresh and nobody wants that last anything, right? That's why produce displays are overflowing with the lemons because no one wants to buy a lemon if there's just 3 lemons on display. They want to buy a lemon off 500 lemons on display. And the same thing with the meat and seafood counters, but with seafood in particular, again, because it's so perishable, there's just ridiculous amounts of waste that happen because people want to see a big variety of fresh or thawed seafood when we could just very easily be buying it frozen. And in some cases, it might actually be fresher to you if you buy it frozen and thawed in your kitchen. Do you guys want to add anything to the frozen fresh
Well, I
conversation?
can just say, as a fisherman for many many years, we would stock our own freezer because how lucky am I to go out and catch fish? I know how to process it in my own kitchen and then freeze it right away to have down the line. So I know that it holds up, especially just, vacuum sealed, take all the air right out, get it on ice right away in the freezer right away. And then, 3, 4, 6 months later, thawed up, and it tastes just as good as it would fresh. I mean, I know that because I was fortunate enough to be able to compare that. Um, and so, I think that's going to be a really helpful thing for um, in general, like kind of the food insecurity challenges that a lot of communities face. To be able to have shelf stable things, to have frozen options, to be able to stock your freezer and things like that. Yeah, to be able to ship it that way, and expand some of our domestic caught seafood into the interior of the US, like we're talking about places that don't have access to it, so that we're not exporting it overseas. And when you're able to do that, you're able to get a better price to the fishermen so that they can actually sustain themselves a little bit more, with the high cost of production, and things like that. So there's a lot of benefits to being able to flash freeze something and for consumers to accept that. And yeah, I can't say enough about that. Our co-op is doing that. The Chatham Harvesters co-op, we we had the fishermen coming right in, and we were vacuum sealing and putting it right into the freezer, so that we could go to the farmers market 2 days later, on the days that the guys weren't coming in on the day of the farmers market, because you can't always fish that day, right? You got stormy seas, you've got closures. There's a lot of management that restrict certain times a year and things like that. But we still got to feed everybody, right? So if you want to support the ecosystem, then you're going to have to freeze things sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
And, you
Go
know,
ahead.
the freezing of fish is like often, not always, but with like liquid nitrogen. Whereas some folks might be familiar with like some produce, the gases used to like cryogenically freeze some of these like fruits and vegetables are super toxic and like not great for humans to be around. And by the time it reaches the grocery store, the effect fades. But it's just like
They're
you
still in
don't
the environment. Yeah.
exactly, and you don't have to be afraid of that with fish because it's most often just nitrogen. Um, Yeah, and you know, there's obviously like having to freeze food and ship food and all these things like isn't great. Like, ideally, you know, we're working away from like any of that, but like, you know, thinking of like supply chain issues, the damage from, you know, farmed farmed finfish operations getting larger, taking over, the damage from like fish, even wild caught fisheries getting overly consolidated so that it's only the massive like factory fleets out there. Um, the damage from those is going to be way more than the damage from getting really awesomely caught frozen fish from maybe not your region or something like that. So just like, yeah, it takes so much knowledge of like the like ecosystem of fisheries right now to like make that comparison. But it's like if you talk with any local regional fisher folk, they're gonna say frozen's great, and it's for
Yeah.
good reason.
Yeah. All right. I have two more topics I'd love to talk about. One is certifications, of course, and just, you know, where can people go? What are some of the issues going on with some of these organizations that are, you know, giving green lights to some things and red lights to the others. And then after that, I want to kind of close out with talking about like how can we increase consumption of seafood? What are your favorite ways to cook it? I mean, I think people are just scared to cook it at home.
Mhm.
I grew up on Long Island and we ate fish all the time, and I watched my dad cook it, and I'm not scared of my oven and throwing a whole fish in there. So for me, it's not a big deal. But for a lot of people, I do think it's intimidating to cook fish. So I'd love to kind of just, you know, inspire people to eat more, to get more adventurous, and to you know, maybe pick up that fish that they haven't heard of the name before, and it doesn't have to be those top four fish. It can be, you know, that beautiful white looking fish that's just there and looks good. Anyway, so let's start with certifications and how do folks navigate all these certifications that they're seeing at the retail level?
Let me just briefly mention. Yeah, I mean, we see like red, green, yellow lists, Seafood Watch, Monterey Bay, places like that, where um, you know, they're saying this is not sustainably caught, therefore don't consume it, don't buy it, don't eat it. But those lists don't take into consideration scale. So they might look at some, you know, gear type or something, that or stock assessment of that fish, and say, you know, it's been depleted from the ocean, and the way that that's harvested is very, very damaging because it drags along the bottom or something like that. But what's concerning is that it doesn't take into consideration that there's small, medium, and industrial scale fishing operations in our waters. And so when you have somebody who's at a small scale, that's sustainable because, you know, they're highly managed, first of all. They're complying with those management because they don't have any really other choice. I know this because I was a very, very small scale fishing operation. And some of the fish that I harvested were on those, you know, yellow and red lists. Yet they happened to be abundant in my waters at the time that I was harvesting. And I was literally pulling them out of the ocean with these two hands, pulling nets with no machinery. You can't get more sustainable than that. So when I look at those lists, it removes the consumer from the fisherman, from their food producer, and just tells them, like, hey, look at this list and don't know anything else about the way it was caught. And I know it's easier to do that because it's, you know, there's scientists and there's people behind that list who've done some research and they've really thought about it. And ocean conservation is the ultimate thing behind all that. Um, but a lot of ocean conservation measures don't take into consideration, you know, the family the family fishermen, the family seafood producers. So we really need to look at that before we can kind of blanket ban certain species, because it does really do harm to those smaller scale producers that are just, using their hands, doing what they've done for multiple generations, trying to make a living and end up fishing really in the red because they can't find a market, because their fish has been, so to speak, banned um, on a seafood watch list.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention, the basis for a lot of these bans comes from, annual quarterly reports of like fish stock, and it's like, well, who's measuring the fish stock? It's the fishing folks, and like, one like Pacific groundfish, for instance, has been something that has been people have been trying to restore it for a really long time. Um, there was um, there was a fishing quota system that was implemented with the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and it was like lauded as, look how much like these quotas like fix the Pacific groundfish. But it's like, if you actually talk to fishermen who are in the Pacific Northwest, like they're like the quota system's not helping, and like the quota system doesn't help anywhere. In fact, it's done damage in a lot of areas. And that's a whole thing because like the quota, like the permits for that are like tradable, so people are just like consolidating them, selling them, and typical uh, kind of things in that realm. But the data we have around fish stock is hard, and when you see a small like fishing operation, you think they're gonna go fish for the thing that's like almost gone or like in damage. They're not gonna be able to catch anything. So like they're gonna go for things that are plentiful and healthy, and if they take it, it's not going to damage their potential income next year. Um, and so with certifications, they're just too reductive, and it's hard because I think like at the core, a lot of these certifications like have really good intention. It's just like, how can we at least steer people toward better food decisions? Um, but I think that hope is like kind of toxic because all they're doing is severing the relationships of like local producers and consumers. And I know that that's not always possible because like, people be out here working like 2 or 3 jobs because times are hard. um, and in that case, I mean, like you get whatever food, gets you your nutrition or gets you through the day. Don't sweat it. But for the folks who do have the time, like get to know your producers. Even if it's not everything, even if it's only for like eggplants you get, or only for beef or something. But like once you get to know one, you'll get to know two, and then slowly like that'll spread out. Um, and they're going to be way better than any certification.
Mm-hmm. That was a really interesting thing at the onset of the pandemic. Was there was this collective instinct for people to be food secure, and as a fisherman, um, with a retail boat license, I'm able to sell my fish. I was able to sell my fish directly off the boat, which we had done for generations, um, but never like that, where people I'd never seen before coming from Boston and New York moving out here being like, I need to find where my food producers are. And the sense of relief and gratitude that they had towards us was amazing. And that those relationships continued for some people. And they realized, like, oh, yeah, that this is a good idea, because if for whatever reason we lose a sense of food security again, and for some people that is every day, but I remember my great grandmother who lived out here during the Great Depression, which is certainly not like the Dust Bowl, but there were still hard times. I remember asking her, like, what was it like? Did you not have food? And she said, oh no, she was a fisherman's wife, so oh no, we always had fish. we could always we always had fish, and even if we weren't catching, we knew somebody who was catching. That's one of the benefits of living in a coastal community or a coastal state. You can, within a few hours, you can drive and find somebody who's got food, for you. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And what it does is it helps people realize, oh, right, when you think about the ocean, you're not just thinking about, this, conservation management thing. You're thinking about people actually feeding you. Um, and we always need to remember that our food producers probably should be paid like NFL superstars and things like that, but they're unfortunately not. Um, but they probably should be, because they are giving us the most necessary thing that we could possibly need, which is food.
Yeah, I'll just add a little anecdote. My son, who is 18, during COVID, experienced the same thing on the farm, and actually wrote his college essay on how proud he was, how he had a new sense of pride because he was an essential worker. And we actually pulled him out of school so that he could work on the farm during COVID, which was helpful for the farm. And also, he's just not a Zoom kid. So he wanted to, not partake in Zoom learning. And it really solidified for him that he wanted to be a food producer, experiencing COVID and seeing all the people that came out from nowhere, just like you said,
Mm-hmm.
driving all the way out from Boston to the little farm, and just being so thankful to have a place even just to walk around. But also, to get to know who's producing their food. Um, I want to now kind of finish up with thoughts on how do we get more people eating fish. I love fish. I eat it all the time. I wonder, you might know more. Maybe it's not a cooking thing. Maybe people feel like it's too expensive, or it's just too they don't like the flavor. Like, what's going on? Why don't Americans eat more fish?
Um, I can jump in because I think Shannon can one speak to some cooking stuff and like processing stuff that'll be really awesome way to close this out, and mine's a little less happy cheery. um, so yeah, I mean there's a lot to it, like, and fish, like as a resource from the ocean, are not expensive. Fish in a grocery store are extremely expensive. Um, and I mentioned this quota system, and for folks who like want to check out more, like there's a lot written up about catch shares is the colloquial name for them. Colloquial, is that the right term? And what happens is, um, because there's a limited amount of fish that can be caught any season, which again, not inherently a bad idea, but there's permits to the rights to those percentages of fish. And in a lot of places, there's like sometimes down to like two people or businesses who have all of it. Um, and they don't even own a boat or a fishing pole or anything. They are just rich people who bought these as an investment, which means if you are a local fisherman in that area, you have to pay someone to be even able to go out on the water to catch. Um, and it gets extremely bad sometimes. We have someone in our network who fishes out of the Gulf, and the going rate for like red snapper per pound, sorry, the Gulf of Mexico, there's a lot of Gulfs. The going rate for uh, a pound of red snapper was $4.50 a pound. To be able to fish for those red snapper in the first place, um, they had to promise, or they had to get a deal that they would pay $4.25 per pound that they caught, which means for all the red snapper they're catching, they're getting 25 cents a pound. So obviously they stopped. Like that was their last season. That's just impossible. And there's a lot of situations like that where people have to like absurdly inflate the cost of these fish to make up for just like the flat amount being taken off because of these quota systems.
Mm.
And these quotas could exist without a privatized like ownership to them. Like there can still just be like limits to catch, because these management, like the fishery management councils are like, and there's improvements that could be made, but the fishing folk have to abide by like the communal management process. Like managing the commons is like things we've done for millennia, but then for some reason they're like, nah, you can't do it anymore. Do these catch shares. So that drives up the cost so much. And then on top of that, just like the narratives like, oh, there's mercury in fish, which is also, you can get very safe fish from mostly like anywhere in the US. And the culture of like fish workers being like gross and stinky, is just like, it creates this awful stigma around fish that, um, it's like our last like major source of like wild, uh, caught food, and that's incredible. Like it should be like revered in that sense. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to illustrate something that you were asking Diana about why aren't people eating more fish? Think about, a lot of Americans make a burger patty, right? They take ground beef or pork or whatever, they ball it up in their hands, they pat it, then they spend some time on the grill. They got to, watch that burger so they don't overcook it. Put it, prep a bun, put it on a thing, whatever. That's an American tradition that a lot of people enjoy and spend time doing. It takes so much less time to open up a package. Let's just say any whitefish. We could just say let's just say a skate wing, because nobody knows what a skate wing is. But I can tell you can get a skate wing. They're abundant in Massachusetts waters. You can open up a package of skate wings. You can put it in a casserole dish, put some breadcrumbs on it, little olive oil, and throw it in the oven and walk away and read an article on whatever. And 15 minutes later, pull it out of the oven and you have dinner.
That tastes like scallops magically.
Yeah, and it tastes amazing. And it was wild caught, and
Yeah.
you're supporting a local fisherman. And so, people talk about, I don't know how to cook fish, I don't know the timing, I don't know this. Well, you just got to experiment a little bit. And most local fishermen or local seafood kind of co-ops or community supported fisheries, they want to tell you how to process it. They want to tell you how to cook it and prep it. We know because we've been spending our entire lives, generations back, doing it and have the expert knowledge. I can tell you right now, a lot of people are like, whoa, mackerel, ugh. Whoa, bluefish, ugh. It's ugh. Top favorite fish, mackerel, right here. It's so easy. Cook it whole. All you do, cut the head off, cut the belly out. That takes literally 2 seconds. And you pop it in the oven and you let it go. And then you take it out. It's like playing with your food. You pull the rack right out. That's fun. You pick the meat away. You can eat it with your fingers. I mean, and it's so good. It is so dense with those omegas. Everybody's looking for omega-3 fatty acids. It helps with your brain function. It eliminates all the brain fog from the stress and all the cortisol spikes that we all experience every single day. All that just kind of, melts away over time if you eat more fish like that. And so I'm a huge advocate of eating fish. I'm a huge advocate of eating the whole fish. A lot of people are afraid of the time it takes to process a whole fish, but the majority of the world actually does that. When you go to a market in Asia or in Europe, there are more whole fish in the display case than there are fillets. And for some reason, the majority of Americans have gotten away from that because we want everything to be quick, fast. But we also, in the same breath, want to spend more time with our families, and we want to prep meals and cook meals, and we want that. So if we want that, then we have to choose to take the time to do that the same way you choose to make your burger patty and spend 10 minutes at the grill. It's the same amount of time.
Yeah, I'm right with you with the mackerel and the bluefish. And in fact, one time in my fish share, my community fish share, there was a whole fish like 2 feet long in my bag, and I'm like, "What is?" I didn't even know what it was because we didn't. I don't know. I wasn't like on the newsletter list or whatever, so I didn't even know. I just would wing it with whatever I got. But this thing, so I looked it up. It was a bluefish. So I just roasted it whole, and it was actually the best fish I've ever had in my entire life.
Oh yeah.
So delicious. And I just also want to put a plug in for you parents out there. I think it's important to condition kids at a young age to be excited and curious about their food. And I certainly did that with my kids. And like the more tentacles, the more close it is to an actual animal, the more cool it was to them. And to be able to pull the rack out or the fin apart or like to poke at the eyeball if I left it on there, like they actually thought it was amazing that they got to eat this thing. And I think most kids, if you just let them be curious and playful with their food, would also have that attitude towards their food instead of like utter disgust, which is, I think what parents might feel themselves or kind of subliminally pass along to their children. Um, and I'm really psyched now to have such adventurous older teenagers that eat everything, have amazing palates, and are still in the more tentacles the better kind of category. So, and I want to do a shout out too for squid, just, as we're talking about sustainable fish. Uh, Squid is super sustainable, super healthy, really cheap way to get your protein, and fun because it has tentacles. And my kids like thought squid was the funnest thing ever when I would cook it. And it
Oh,
doesn't have to be deep fried calamari. There's a lot of different ways to prepare it. So,
oh
you
yeah.
guys with me on the squid train?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
In our fish weirs, that was our target species was squid, and we spent a lot of time processing squid. And you can do things with the ink, and it's so much fun to cut and clean with kids. I
Yeah.
mean, it's messy, which you know, just throw some newspaper down and do it on your counter. Wrap up the newspaper and toss it. Like, not a big deal. Um, Sauteing squid, stuffing it and baking it, stuffing it and grilling it. I mean, there's endless possibilities. Yeah, and the tentacles are super delicious. And if you ever get squid at a restaurant and you don't see tentacles, be aware it's probably not squid.
We'll leave that to people's imagination. I know what you're referring to. Some people might not because they might not have heard that one. But yeah, gross.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. So where can people, Shannon, let's start with you. If people want to join, um, a fish community in Massachusetts, who do they call?
Yeah, so a couple places. I mean, like Jon was talking about, localcatch.org has the seafood finder tool, and that is nationwide. Out here on the Cape, we have the Chatham Harvesters cooperative, and we have a number of different programs, and we have a retail space out here in Chatham. That's chathamharvesters.com. You can go there and check out, what markets that we're in and places like that. Um, yeah, and there's just I mean, there's community supported fisheries all throughout the Commonwealth, all throughout New England. Jon, I'm going to throw it to you. You probably have some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's always a lot of good options. Red's Best works with like a lot of folks in the area too. Like if you're like in Boston, and who they source from is a lot of really good local fishing folks. And honestly, even beyond just like going from Red's Best asking Red's Best where to direct source some stuff is always a cool idea too, if you are in this area. But otherwise, finder.localcatch.org.
Great. And any plugs for NAMA? We'll put the food print links on the show notes. But can they follow NAMA on social media? Like pimp your stuff.
Yeah. So definitely check out namanet.org, our website. We put out a lot of stuff. I think it's nama_net on Instagram. I just don't know our socials.
Okay.
But another one I will shout out is Block Corporate Salmon. It's a crew that we work with who are fighting against genetically engineered salmon, because it's a land-based genetically engineered salmon farm, which is just everything wrong. Just a nightmare situation. And can always use more voices in fighting against that, because if that were to happen, there's 30 or 40 other genetically engineered animals in the works. And so check it out on social media, Block Corporate Salmon, all one word. And there's a lot of really good information there. And nama_net for Instagram. And I'm sure on our website, we have the links to our other socials.
Awesome. Shannon, did you want to add any shout outs or links?
Yeah, just Chatham Harvesters. We're on Instagram and Facebook, chathamharvesters.com. Supporting local fishing families, at least in the Commonwealth. I always want to put a plug for Fishing Partnership, and we're keeping the fishermen safe and healthy with a number of resources, and we got to keep our food producers safe and healthy. Fishing is a dangerous job in the country, and we want to make sure that they come home and they bring their catch home, and they're home for their families and keep fishing. So support your fishing families, support your food producers in a number of ways, by buying what they catch and just recognizing that they are there to feed you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. That was a little bit longer than I warned you it might be, but I was super interested in the conversation. I learned a ton. I hope our listeners did too. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Diana.
Thanks. Good talking.